turns out, script, self-prioritization in response, selection. Right now, in this moment, your brain is doing something absolutely wild without your permission. It's rigging the game in your favor. Every single time you have to make a choice, even a tiny one, even one that shouldn't matter, your brain is systematically biasing the decision toward what benefits you. And here's the kicker. It's not doing this because you're selfish. It's doing it because you're human. And scientists just figured out exactly how this bias sneaks into your decision-making at the computational level. So the question becomes, if your brain is cheating for you before you're even aware a choice exists, how much of what you think is your free will is actually just neurological self-interest on autopilot? We've known for years that people have what researchers call the self-prioritization effect. Basically, you're faster at recognizing your own name than other names. You remember information better when it's about you. You notice faces more quickly when they're your face. It's so consistent that psychologists stopped being surprised by it decades ago. We filed it under obvious, the way we file away obvious things in science. Of course, people prioritize themselves. It's built in. But here's what nobody really understood. This self-bias, does it just affect how you perceive things, or does it go deeper? Does it actually change how you decide things? And more specifically, can we peer into the actual machinery of decision-making and watch this bias happen in real time? That question sat unanswered for long enough that it started to matter. A team led by researcher Shohang Yin at Shanghai University of Sport, working with colleagues at East China Normal University and Shanghai Mental Health Center, decided to find out. They published their work in May 2026 in Cognition, one of the top journals for this kind of cognitive research. What they discovered wasn't just a new confirmation of something we already knew. It was a high-resolution map of how self-bias actually works inside your brain's decision-making process. So here's what they did. Imagine you're sitting in front of a computer screen. First, you learn a simple code. You associate your own name with a specific shape. Let's say your name goes with squares, and your friend's name goes with circles. Then you practice linking each shape to a specific key on the keyboard. Press this key if you see a square. Press that key if you see a circle. Standard stuff. But then comes the real experiment. You see a visual target, a shape, and you have to respond with the right key. The trick is that sometimes you're forced to give a specific response. The researchers tell you which shape to respond to. You have no choice. But other times, and this is crucial, you get to choose. You see a target, and you can freely decide whether to respond as self or friend. Now, rationally speaking, both responses should be equally valid. Both should take about the same time. Both should be equally attractive to choose. Except they aren't. What the researchers found across 3 separate experiments was staggeringly consistent. When people had a free choice, they picked the self-response more often, like significantly more often. And they did it faster. If the non-self response was supposed to take about 600 milliseconds, the self-response was faster. The bias wasn't subtle, it was everywhere. But here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't just measure how fast and how often people chose the self-response. They used something called hierarchical drift diffusion modeling, basically mathematical reverse engineering of the decision-making process. They fed their reaction time data and accuracy data into a model that can decompose a decision into its component parts. How much evidence you're collecting before you decide. How easy it is for evidence to shift you toward one option or the other. How fast you're processing information overall. What they found was this. The self-bias wasn't coming from faster processing speed across the board. It was coming from biased evidence accumulation. Your brain wasn't just operating faster when the self-response was an option. Your brain was filtering the evidence. It was treating the same information differently depending on whether that information supported the self-response or not. The evidence for choosing self was being weighted as more compelling, as more persuasive, even when, objectively, the evidence was identical. Think of it like a courtroom. Two lawyers present identical evidence, but one lawyer is arguing for the self-response, and the jury, your brain, is unconsciously deciding that the self-lawyer's points are stronger. The jury isn't hearing different evidence, it's just interpreting it through a self-favoring lens. The weights are unequal from the moment the evidence starts accumulating, and when the researchers removed the voluntary choice, when they forced responses, the bias dropped. The self-prioritization effect was still there, but it was weaker. It was the freedom to choose that activated the full strength of this bias. When you didn't have to choose, your brain's self-interest machinery ramped down. So what does this actually mean for your life? Well, first, you're not as unbiased as you think you are, and that's not necessarily a problem. This isn't some catastrophic flaw in human cognition. It's efficient. Your brain is making a bet. The self usually knows what it needs, so prioritize the self. Most of the time, this works fine, but it matters in situations where you actually should be impartial. If you're a hiring manager and you have to choose between candidates, and one of them slightly reminds you of yourself, this research suggests your brain is going to unconsciously weight their qualifications as more impressive. Not because you're consciously biased, because at the level of evidence accumulation, you're biased. It matters in medical decision-making, in jury duty, in any situation where you're supposed to evaluate multiple options fairly. The self-bias isn't something you can simply think your way out of. It's baked into the computational process of decision-making itself. That said, there are limits to this study. It was conducted in a lab with abstract shapes and arbitrary rules. That's by design. They wanted a clean, controlled test of the mechanism. But real decisions are messier. You have stakes, you have emotions, you have history. We don't know yet whether this computational bias scales up to high-stakes decisions or whether context and motivation change the fundamental mechanism. This research opens up a whole bunch of new questions. Does this bias strengthen or weaken with age? Is it culturally universal, or do people from more collectivist cultures show weaker self-bias in evidence accumulation? Can you train it away, or is it too fundamental to the architecture of human decision-making? What about people with autism or certain mood disorders? Does the self-bias operate differently? And here's the deeper question that this research raises. If this bias is happening at the computational level, before conscious awareness, can we ever make truly objective decisions? Or is some degree of self-bias just an inevitable part of being a biological decision-maker? The study is clean, the mechanism is specific, and the implications are quietly unsettling. Your brain isn't just favoring yourself because you consciously want it to. Your brain is fundamentally weighted toward self-interest at the level where decisions are actually made. That's not a character flaw, that's architecture. And knowing that architecture exists is the first step to working around it. Turns out scientists have been busy, and they're not done yet.